Hey everyone, this is Bulba Trainer. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Umbreon Libris, who kindly mentioned me in one of his latest videos. It really means a lot that a PokeTuber I look up to enjoys my content. If you joined from his recommendation, thank you for following, and if you haven't already, be sure to check out his channel. He comes up with great theories and redesigns of Pokemon, and the video I mentioned is a really fair and balanced critique of Calyrex as a legendary Pokemon. I also want to apologize for the lack of video last week. Originally, I hadn't planned on reviewing Sword and Shield. However, I wanted to talk about some of the complaints regarding graphics that I've seen the game get, and since the Crown Tundra expansion is still relatively new, I figured the two topics would go together. However, because I don't have any self-control when writing scripts, I will be splitting this into two parts. Part 1 will be a discussion on the graphics themselves, and Part 2 will deal with the story and overall experience. A quick note before we begin, these are my opinions, formed by my experience, and I don't expect everyone to agree. But if you do disagree, please be polite about it, explain why, because I'm always down for expanding my viewpoints. Also, I would very much appreciate it if you would subscribe if you like this video and leave a thumbs up. So I'm going to break into the graphics discussion by talking about a few other games that better illustrate my point. I've been playing Pokemon for a long time. A very long time. I got Pokemon Blue within the first week of it coming out, and I've more or less, mostly more, loved the franchise since then. I've been playing video games in general even longer. I remember when this was a massive improvement in graphics. Seriously, when Mario 64 came out, we were so impressed. It's less impressive now, but that's okay because the graphics have improved, to a point, over time. I say to a point because the aim of Mario has never been to look too realistic. We tried that once. It didn't go well. That's okay though, because it's a particular art style that we can enjoy for what it is. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a game like Assassin's Creed. It has its own style, in fact, each game does, but in general the graphics have improved with each game. It's become expected. If Valhalla had released with retro pixelated graphics, people would have been upset. I mean, more people would have been upset. And one of the games that frequently gets compared to Sword and Shield is Dragon Quest, which has likewise had its own style, while improving in graphics each generation, culminating in shots like this, which are rather impressive. Pokemon is different. The three games that I listed above, and even Breath of the Wild, which is another game that is frequently compared to Sword and Shield, all have one thing in common. Can you guess what it is? Give up? Okay. All of those games have been comfortable on consoles for a long time. Yes, there are handheld titles in each of those series, but they were never handheld franchises overall. Pokemon, on the other hand, only recently made the switch, get it, to a home console. Yes, side titles have been released on consoles in the past, but the mainline series for most of its life has lived outside of that realm. Even being on Switch is a bit of a murky line because the Switch itself is a combination of a home and handheld console. Pokemon, at least its main titles up until recently, have never been on a console. I'm going to admit that art direction hasn't always been Pokemon's greatest strength. I've mentioned this before, but part of the reason why the creepypastas and Lavender Town Syndrome can be so believable is because the first two generations had kind of a creepy atmosphere. The buildings mostly all looked the same, the pixel art was questionable sometimes, and the music wasn't doing it any favors. But we still loved it. We somehow managed to meld the obvious intention shown through concept art and the anime with the realities of game design at the time, and slowly but surely the games got improved graphics every generation. However, because it remained on handheld systems for so long, the graphics, while improved, were never really awe-inspiring, and that's been okay because the Pokemon themselves seem to fit into that world. They're not super realistic, and they're not meant to be, and that's part of their charm. They're monsters, and while they do draw inspiration from real-world creatures, objects, and legends, I've never felt that they were meant to be super realistic. Detective Pikachu is a good example of why. While some of the designs in the movie are phenomenal, a lot of them are a bit off-putting, to say the least, if for no other reason than we're not used to seeing them so detailed. And there were a lot of vocal critics of the designs in the movie, or people who just got creeped out by some of them, which was bound to happen, because look at this. Nightmare fuel. Even when Pokemon went from 2D to 3D models, there were people who were upset and disappointed. Personally, I think Xatu's design didn't translate well. I never actually pictured it flying, and most of its sprites show it standing, so to have it gliding like that kind of weirds me out. But I've seen people dislike Typhlosion, mostly because of the lack of Flame Collar when it's not attacking, Haxorus, Marshtomp, and a few others. And these weren't even really redesigns, they just made something 2D look 3D. But even with the added dimension, the Pokemon still look cartoonish, which again is not a bad thing. Not only does it add to the suspension of disbelief, it keeps things constant. Yes, Poliwhirl used to have fingers and now it doesn't. Yes, Mew used to look far more unique, and so on, but overall, Pokemon have remained relatively unchanged from the way they looked when they debuted. Even as graphics have improved, the design has had to stay simplistic. Pokemon has never been about massive jumps in graphic quality. It's never needed to be. I guarantee you people would have gotten upset if Nidoking had progressively gotten more and more realistic. Not all of the people, some would have loved it, but while they added little improvements here and there, the consistency is comforting. I can catch a Bulbasaur in Sword and Shield. Well, not actually catch, but and it still looks pretty similar to the first one I got all those years ago. So what does this have to do with Sword and Shield? Well, like I said, one of the largest complaints I've seen, read, and heard about the games is its barren design choices. I mean, people are also criticizing the decks and linear storytelling, but we'll get to that next time. But I wanted to focus on graphics first. I will admit there are times I'm in the wild area and I see a tree and think, my goodness, is this really the best they could muster? The lack of vegetation, details, accessories, bells, and whistles. It upsets some fans. Very frequently I see comparisons being made, and I'm guilty of that too. A lot of the trees in the wild area actually remind me of this one in Ocarina of Time. I can't unsee it. And I'll admit, especially if you play a game like Breath of the Wild or Dragon Quest First, things do look a little lacking. I'm not going to sit here and convince you that this is the best that the Switch can offer. We know better. The thing is, though, I don't believe it's meant to be. For one thing, there are plenty of gorgeous views you can get in the game if you're looking at landscapes, like the wheat fields on Route 4, or when you're approaching a city or town. There's a sort of pastel palette combined with interesting architecture that give off a modern but still fantastical vibe, which Pokemon has always been about. For another thing, the art style at least matches the Pokemon. Here, Bulbasaur's 3D model is put in front of random spots in the other games I've mentioned. To me, because as a reminder this is opinion, it looks more cartoony the more realistic the background gets. In order to scale up the world, the models would have to be 2, and as I mentioned earlier, that would be a controversial choice. Knowing Pokemon fans, being a Pokemon fan, I think we can safely say that redesigning all the Pokemon would bring some backlash. Doesn't necessarily mean you personally would have backlash over it, it just means that the community as a whole would find it controversial. It may be a hurdle the franchise will want to tackle one day, but not when it's just finding its footing on home consoles. Because the biggest point that I want to bring up is that very issue. The series has been handheld for nearly all of its existence, and like it or not, design priority has always, in my mind at least, seemed to lie with the Pokemon themselves, not the world and environment. They have managed to bring us some stunning graphics over the years. I particularly enjoy the more traditional leaning architecture in the Heart Gold Soul Silver remakes, but the thing is, I also still like playing old school Gold and Silver, because the point of Pokemon is in the title. There are games that I play where graphics have an effect on how well I enjoy it, how much I can be immersed in it, but Pokemon simply isn't one of those titles. I was able to play with this while knowing it was supposed to represent this. If the designers had the same mindset, graphics being an afterthought isn't all that surprising. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't hope that whatever the next game is, be it Generation 9 or a Let's Go Sinnoh, or even a sequel to Sword and Shield, that I don't expect them to have learned some lessons and improve. But overall, for being one of their first console games, I don't think the graphics are too terrible. Trying to navigate around a new style of playing, going from a handheld to a home-ish console, keeping the graphics in line with the previous titles, and keeping the graphics in line with the Pokémon themselves probably culminated in what we received, which is probably why I've seen people be a bit warmer to the DLC graphics because they had started implementing the lessons they've learned. I'm not going to try and convince you to like the graphics of Sword and Shield. That's not the point of this video. I just wanted to try and be a bit more fair in my critique. Yes, it's easy to take a game like Breath of the Wild and say that Pokémon could have done better, but it also helps to remember that Zelda has had a home on consoles for all of its life. Pokémon only recently got there. Let's give them a bit to catch up. But what are your thoughts? Do the graphics really pull you out of the games? Are you okay with them? Or do you not even pay attention and just focused on filling up that dex? Let me know in the comments down below, and remember that people will have different opinions, and that's what makes fandoms fun. Like I said, there will be a part 2 to this review, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out. Depending on how well this video does, I will either release it next week or the week after. If people really dislike this review, I'll space out the second video with another topic. Either way, I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for your support, and please, stay safe.